Okay, I guess we'll get started. Welcome to Ratio Christi. This is week 4 of the semester, if you can believe it. We're over halfway through September, and there's a severe thunderstorm warning out right now. So we'll get started so we can also escape before it escapes us. But I heard that it's not supposed to hit until around midnight, so we should be safe. But it's Nebraska, so I don't know.
I'll try to stop lecturing before midnight.
Okay, yeah, we'll hold you to that this week. Let's see, so kind of the general announcements, but like I said, welcome to Ratio Christi. Most of us know about the food over there, but we have the good chili cheese dip, it looks like. That's always one of my favorites. I was going to put you on tonight that if you look at Wesley and Ben and Janae, they're all wearing Ratio Christi t-shirts. And so if you're interested in one of those, they'll probably look something like that. So talk to one of them, or Adam or me or whoever. And at some point that order's going to go in. I don't know when, but it will at some point. So anyway, a couple general things. Again, we have postcards at the back if you want to invite people from your church, people that you know, people that are interested in apologetics or the defense of Christianity. Let them know that we exist, and that if they're interested in what we do. You can also sign up for our emails. Every week, Wesley sends those out, giving you some resources, telling you what the topic's going to be, where we're going to eat. We were at Raising Cane's tonight, and I don't know where we're going to be next week, but somewhere. TBD, yeah, to be decided. So watch Wesley's email. That's how you know. Or Facebook, or Instagram, or Twitter, which has come alive now. We're finally updating Twitter again. So we only have 5 followers. So just out of pity, if you could give us a follow on Twitter, we'd really appreciate it. But Facebook, we've got a substantial following. But Twitter, we're still working on. So anyway. But yeah, that's that. If you want to stay up with us, Twitter, Facebook, email, all those things are important. Tabling happens now. We're on our kind of regular schedule. So every Wednesday in the City Campus Union from 11 to 1, we do tabling, which is where we have signs, we have our postcards, we tell people who we are, what we do, and we have conversations about the things we have conversations here, and invite them to come and go further and go deeper with us on our themes that we do. So if you want to join Wesley for that, he would welcome that. That's, again, Wednesdays 11 to 1 in the City Campus Union. I think the last thing I have is that our Does God Exist special topics lecture will be in Brace Hall, room 105, same place as last time, and that'll be October 14th. That's the second Monday in October, so invite people to that. We'll be recapping the argument for the existence of God that we went over last semester, arguments, plural, actually. So if you are wanting to get brushed up on that, or worked with us last semester, or want to invite somebody who's new to that material, or new to Ratio Christi, that would be a great event. So that's October 14th, second Monday in October. So I think now that I've rattled off most of the things that were on my mind, we'll get down to it. We're doing our Who is Jesus series. What did he say? Who was he? What's the evidence? And so I'll welcome back for the 4th week in a row our chapter director, Adam Johnson.
Before I forget, one thing that Ratio Christi would like to start doing around the country at our chapters is inviting students to do internships with Ratio Christi after you graduate. So be thinking about that. If apologetics is something that you're interested in, if you want to serve other people in this area of ministry, even as a career maybe, you could explore that through Ratio Christi. Careers, I mean, full-time job going forward, or if you just like to check it out or spend a year or two serving as an intern with Ratio Christi when you graduate. They're looking to hire students when they graduate, full-time or part-time. So just consider that if this is something that God might be calling you into. It could be here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, or it could be at other schools. So maybe you'd like to spend some time, a year or two, in another state and explore that. I just want to throw that out there just to get you guys thinking about it, if that's something that God might be calling you to. We have Ratio Christi now at over 150 universities across the country and several overseas. So a lot of opportunities for internships. Okay, we're meeting in a university church. So if you're new to Lincoln, or if you're looking for a new church, I'd encourage you to check out University Church. It's a Southern Baptist church. They don't make a big deal about that. But it has a good crowd here on Sunday mornings. We come and worship here quite a bit, not every Sunday, but often we're here to see some of you folks. worshiping at University Church, and they're mostly trying to reach and serve college students. So if you're in that vicinity of age, it might be a church to check out. As Joel said, we're going through our theme this semester, focusing on Jesus Christ. And of course, we're trying to make the case, the big argument here that we're trying to present is that Jesus, in fact, is God. He was more than just a good teacher. He was more than just a moral man, more than just a human being. That in fact, he is God in the flesh. Now the argument, at least the first argument that we're going to go through, is going to take a couple months. There's a lot of pieces to it, or a lot of steps to it. You can simplify it, you can do it, and even I did the first night in less than 5 minutes. But if you really want to take the time, which that's what we do at Ratio Christi, if you really want to take the time and dig into the details, it's going to take us a few months to get through this first main argument, that Jesus is God. So let's walk through it. First thing we started with was, did he even exist? You know, there are some out there, mostly at the popular level, who claim that the man, not even getting to the fact that we're claiming he's divine, just the man himself never existed. And that's a fairly far-fetched position. Come to find out, there might be one or two scholars out there who hold that position, but it's very, very rare. As we'll see as we go throughout the semester, there's just so much historical evidence for the man Jesus that it's a very fringe, maybe one or two scholars hold such a position. So sometimes you see that at the popular level, but not much at the academic, scholarly level. What I refer folks to, if they want to pursue this, is actually a book by an atheist. Bart Ehrman is a New Testament scholar, got his PhD at Princeton, but he's an atheist, and he has argued, in fact, debated people over the existence of Jesus. So this is a book by the atheist Bart Ehrman, where he goes through and lists and gives all the evidence, historical evidence, that Jesus, the man, existed in history. Now, of course, as an atheist, Ehrman doesn't believe Jesus really was God, so that book isn't useful in that argument. But just to see somebody lay out that historical evidence can be valuable to make the case that Jesus, in fact, did exist merely as a man. The second thing that we asked is, did he claim to be God? Because some people will say, yeah, Jesus did exist in history, but he himself never thought he was God. That was a legend or a myth that his followers added to his teaching later. Sometimes people say much later. But I think there's fairly good historical evidence that no, Jesus himself did claim to be God. And we'll see a lot of that evidence as we move through the semester. So I think a fairly strong case can be made that Jesus himself claimed to be God. Now, a lot of people throughout history have claimed to be God. Just because somebody claims to be God, obviously that doesn't mean that he is. So what good reasons would we have to believe his claim? And that brought us to this part in the argument. I think miracles establish his claim, or miracles provide good evidence or good reasons to believe his claims. So miracles serve that function. And I think this is all very intuitive to most people. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in where somebody has said, you know, I will believe what you're saying, or I will believe there is a God, or I will believe X, Y, Z if such and such a miracle is done before my very eyes right now. Okay? So that seems to be a fairly intuitive thing, that miracles serve this function. So I gave a very tentative definition of miracles. Said that a miracle is a supernatural act of God that you can say suspends, you can say breaks. That's a whole big conversation on exactly how miracles and the laws of nature function with one another. We don't have to go into all that. But the important thing that I was trying to press upon here is that the purpose of a miracle is to confirm a message really is true or really is from God. I think that's the purpose of miracles. I think that's how you see miracles play out, for those of you that are Christians, throughout the Bible, is miracles serve that function. So we talked about how they are very similar to in ancient days when a king would send out a message to provide some authentication, some evidence that a message really is from the king, that he would press upon it his signet ring. And that would be a very clear example, a very clear sign that it really was from the king, because that'd be very hard to duplicate. It was very unique. And so a miracle, breaking or bending the laws of nature, seems to be something that only God could do. So in that sense, it's unique. Only God could do it, and it provides then a good way to authenticate something really is from God. And as I said, we see that throughout the Old and the New Testament, going all the way back to the very beginning of the Bible. So when the Bible began to be written, Moses was the first author, right? And if you look at Exodus 4, Moses was very concerned when God told him that he had a message to go and give Pharaoh and the Israelites. Moses was very concerned that people would not believe he really had heard from God. And so what did God do? God gave him the ability to do some miracles as evidence or proof that he really had heard from God. So it seems to be, even from a biblical perspective, that is the purpose of miracles. Now, a lot of folks at this point will jump off. A lot of people at this point in the argument are done. They've heard enough. As soon as you bring up the M word, oftentimes it's over. I mean, come on, miracles. Somebody turning water into wine, raising the dead, healing people. I mean, we've all seen those things on TV where people are being healed. I mean, as soon as you get to this point in the argument, or the point at this point in making the case that Jesus is God, a lot of people are just out of the conversation because of this objection to miracles. Okay? This is so important, though, to our case, making our case that Jesus is God, that we need to spend several weeks on this issue. Several weeks just on making the case for the possibility of miracles. We're doing this before we even get to trying to argue for actual miracles. So think about what we're doing here for a minute. We're not, for a few weeks at least, we're not going to be trying to argue or make a case for actual miracles. We're going to do that, Jesus' miracles, trying to make a case historically for them. But before we even attempt that, we've got to spend some time making a case for the mere possibility of miracles. So that's what we're doing for 3 weeks starting tonight, is making the case for the possibility of miracles. I'll give you an example of the extreme opposition to miracles out there. This is from of all people, a Christian theologian. Okay? So Bultmann wrote that man's knowledge and mastery of the world has advanced to such an extent through science and technology that it is no longer possible for anyone to seriously hold the New Testament view of the world, i.e., the New Testament view of the world, that there is these miracles and demon possession and all that stuff. So even as a Christian theologian, now he would be what we would call a liberal or a neo-orthodox theologian, but he's not alone. Many, many people at an academic level and a popular level have an extreme aversion or stance against miracles. So I'm going to turn over to you guys at the tables for a little while to talk about this. Are you open to not that an actual miracle has taken place, we're not there yet, but are you open to the mere possibility of miracles? Yes or no? And be ready to defend your answer. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to discuss that. All right, like I said, we're going to spend 3 weeks on this topic, so we're certainly not going to try to cover everything tonight. But I'm going to give our lecture tonight, of course. Wesley is up next week. Looking forward to hearing from him. He's going to be talking about this issue from a different perspective. And then we're hoping to bring in, have you heard from Dr. Bashford yet? Okay. Well, he is our faculty advisor. So as an RSO, we have to have a professor who is our advisor. And Dr. Bashford, one of the science professors at UNL, is our faculty advisor. He spoke here last spring, and we invited him to come and speak on this particular issue as a scientist, answering the question, does science prove miracles are impossible? So if we can't get him in to do that on the date that we want him, we might have to push that lecture off for a little bit, but eventually we'll tackle that question sometime this semester, even if we can't do it in the order that we want to. So that's where we're going, just over the next few weeks. I'm very interested to have him speak because it's a very common belief out there that science has disproven miracles. But I like how Dr. Lewontin, I'm taking a guess there, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Regardless, I like how he said it. I think he put it very well. Now, he's an atheist, and he is a science professor at Harvard. One of the major things that he researches and teaches and writes on is evolution. But I like how he put it. Take a look at this. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world. It's kind of long-winded, like a normal professor. But on the contrary, we are forced to this conclusion by our a priori adherence to material causes. For we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So in other words, if you interpret what he's saying, long-winded, big sentence, but basically he's saying, look, it's not that our scientific method and our institutions of science lead us or compel us to believe that there are only material causes, that all that exists is the material universe and all that exists are natural causes. But on the contrary, we're forced to that conclusion by our strict adherence to only material or naturalistic causes. Okay? So I think he says it well. It's not that science disproves miracle, it's that science, at least how he's understanding it and explaining it, seems to cut off that possibility of there being supernatural causes from the very beginning. There seems to be a bias, maybe even a methodological bias against supernatural causes, i.e. miracles. For, as he says, we can't allow a divine foot in the door. So Dr. Bashford, I think, is going to explore this more, just this dichotomy between science and miracles. But I think it's fairly clear, even from nothing else but just this quote, that science doesn't disprove miracles. Well, what's the best way? I overheard some of the conversations at the table when I gave you a few minutes to chat. What is the best way, then, to overcome this bias against miracles? What's the best way to argue, not for an actual miracle, but what's the best way to argue for the mere possibility of miracles? I think C.S. Lewis put it best. Take a look at this. C.S. Lewis can say something in a sentence or two that takes me an hour. But he wrote, if we admit God, must we admit miracles? Indeed, you have no security against it. That just is the bargain. In other words, the best argument for the possibility of miracles is that God exists. If there is a God who created the universe, so we're thinking in terms of a theistic God, right? If there is such a God who created the universe, then you have, and if you believe that, then you have to be open to the possibility of miracles. So in other words, the best argument for the possibility of miracles is the best argument for the existence of God. Think about it. I mean, if there is a God who created the entire universe out of nothing, then certainly he could do any other small little miracle. Whether it's turning water into wine or raising somebody from the dead. I mean, compared to creating the entire universe, all of those other things are quite minuscule. So if there is a God who created the universe, then every other miracle is at least possible. So you might see now why we spent so much time in the spring arguing for the existence of God, and why normally in apologetics you do that first. Because if we've done our job well arguing that there is a God, then that opens up the door for at least the possibility of miracles. If somebody doesn't believe that miracles are possible, I'm not going to continue going down that path trying to give them historical evidence for it. I'm going to go this route and continue just trying to encourage them to believe that there is a God. So I think there's a good, proper, if you will, order about how to go about making our case for Christianity. You start with the existence of God, and then you look at possible miracles that have existed or happened in history. Well, I'm going to turn over to you again quickly here at the table and talk about this. What do you think about C.S. Lewis's argument? I'll put it back up here. If God, then at least the possibility of miracles. What do you think about his argument? Chat about that for a few minutes. All right, another way maybe to say this, and remember all that we're doing here is arguing for the possibility of miracles. We're trying to push back against that bias against miracles, kind of that gut reaction that a lot of people have in our culture, that miracles just happen in fairy tales or in movies. We're trying to push back against that intuition or that assumption by making a case for the possibility of miracles. And I think the best way to do that is to, make your case for the existence of God. In other words, you can put it this way, you can flip it and make it a negative statement. I think the only way, or the best way, maybe the only way, to disprove the possibility of miracles is to disprove the existence of God, right? So again, if I'm interacting with somebody and having a friendly conversation and they don't believe in miracles, right, I'm going to focus on the existence of God instead of trying to make the case for an actual miracle, Jesus' miracles. I think that's where the conversation needs to stay for that person as to whether there's a God or not. Because I think this is fairly strong, in my opinion. Lewis's argument, the way he put it, is fairly strong. So I think you can kind of see why, at least for Ratio Christi, our apologetic method is to go about it in this order, this approach, arguing for the existence of God first, and then try to make a case for Jesus' miracles. Now, if you weren't here last semester, and you're thinking to yourself, man, that sound like a great semester, we'll give you a summary of it here in a couple weeks. Mark it on your calendar, October 14th, the date right there in the middle. We're going to be on campus. It's a Monday night in Brace Hall or Brace Lab. And we're just going to summarize the major arguments for God's existence. So if you'd like to review that material, or if you weren't here last semester, that would be a great time to come and check it out. And please, I would encourage you, we had our first monthly Ratio Christi meeting on campus, had a fairly small crowd, but some new folks who have never been to our Wednesday night. One of the young guys came and had some great conversations. So even if you feel like you're very well versed in arguments for the existence of God, come still and then help be a part of the conversation at the tables, because we set it up similarly to how we do on Wednesday nights. And you can be a part of that conversation, encouraging other people to believe that there is a God. Okay, the other thing that I want to cover tonight, I've kind of made a positive or an offensive, I'm talking about like a sport, offense, defense, not offensive as in hurting somebody's feelings, but an offense argument for the existence of God. Now I want to play a little bit of defense, argument for the possibility of miracles. Now I want to play a little bit of a defense against one of the most famous arguments in history against miracles. Now, you might not have heard of this before, but I tell you, this argument against miracles is still being written about today. Hundreds of years later, people are still writing books, both for and against this argument against miracles. So I think it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time on it. Now, the argument against miracles that I'm referring to is an argument by David Hume. And you might remember we talked about David Hume for quite a bit last fall here at Ratio Christi. He was a famous Enlightenment thinker, so 1700s. He was Scottish, probably an atheist. I just read a book recently who speculated that, first gave some historical facts that he never overtly claimed to be an atheist. Most people just assumed that of him. And there's other things that he wrote that might indicate he was actually a theist. Probably not a Christian, but possibly a theist. But most people would think that Hume probably was an atheist or an agnostic, if you will. He's well known in the history of Western culture as a skeptic, not merely a religious skeptic in this conversation or in this context, when you hear skeptic, you think a religious skeptic, which he definitely was. But he was also a skeptic of all other types of knowledge claims. So his philosophy is well known as the philosophy of skepticism, and he played a very important role in the history of Western philosophy in kind of waking people up from their overconfidence and their ability to know things. So he played a useful role in that sense. I want to show you a quick video about David Hume, and this doesn't really get into his argument against miracles. I'll give that to you after the video. But I wanted to just show you a 4 or 5 minute video about Hume so you could get kind of a gist of what he was concerned with and what he thought about in terms of his skepticism and arguing against the ability of humans to be confident in their knowledge. So take a look at this.
Today's video will concern the topic of epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy that deals with the study of knowledge. In particular, we'll discuss the version of skepticism, which is the idea that we know a lot less than we ordinarily take ourselves to. The sort of skepticism I'll discuss is due to David Hume, who was an 18th century Scottish philosopher and historian. And it targets our knowledge of the unobserved. But to get clearer about just what that amounts to, I'll have to start with some examples. So we ordinarily take ourselves to know lots about things that we haven't directly observed. For instance, I take it that I know that blue whales are the largest animals on Earth. I bet you know that too. I take it I know that the Alpha Centauri system is the nearest star system to our own. I take it I know that there was a man named Napoleon who conquered much of Europe. I also take it I know when the next American presidential election will be. None of these are things that I've directly observed. I haven't seen any blue whales. Certainly haven't seen all other animals on Earth to compare them to. I never met Napoleon, and I haven't observed anything in 2016 yet. And yet, I take it we ordinarily take myself to know all sorts of things about these matters. So how do we know these things about stuff that we haven't observed? In some cases, it seems pretty easy. For instance, I know that all triangles, even triangles I haven't yet observed, have 3 sides. Or I know that next year, if I have 2 apples and 2 oranges, I'll have 4 pieces of fruit. What's special about these cases that makes them so easy to know? The way that Hume put it, they express relations of ideas. A relation of ideas is something whose denial is inconceivable or self-contradictory. Try to imagine a 2-sided triangle. Take it you can't do it. But try to imagine a situation where I have 2 apples and 2 oranges, nothing else, but where I don't have 4 pieces of fruit. Again, I suspect you're going to have trouble. There's another way of getting at the same idea. Relations of ideas have to be true, no matter how the world turns out. They're necessary truths. So what does it take to know claims like this? What does it take to know relations of ideas? To quote Hume, he said that propositions of this kind are discoverable by the mere operation of thought, without dependence on what is anywhere existent in the universe. What does that mean? Why does he think it's true? I take it the idea is something like this. If some claim is a relation of ideas, then it will be true no matter what the world is like. So in order to know that it's true, we don't need to go out and gather evidence about what the world is like. The evidence might tell us the world is this way rather than that way. But no matter what way the world is like, all triangles will have 3 sides. 2 pieces of fruit and another 2 pieces of fruit will make 4 pieces of fruit. So if anything at all is required to know that a relation of ideas is true, it's just understanding. This is what Hume called the mere operation of thought. That's enough to see that it has to be true, and so to know that it's true. Okay, contrast relations of ideas with another class of claims that Hume called matters of fact. So for example, as I now make this video, it's rainy outside. Or here's another one. I have a fluffy puppy. So these claims are true, both of them, but their denials are not inconceivable or contradictory. The mere operation of thought isn't enough to get us knowledge of that truth. You could easily imagine that it's sunny outside. In fact, maybe as you listen to this video, it is. Or you could imagine that I have no pets at all, including no fluffy puppy. You could not fact it could be. So because these claims between the relations of ideas and matters of fact is closely related to what was later called the distinction between the a priori and the a posteriori by Immanuel Kant.
So again, it's not really getting at the issue of miracles, and I didn't intend it to. I'll introduce that to you here in just a minute. I just wanted to give you more of a feel for what type of things David Hume was thinking and writing about when he did his philosophy. How do we know things? When should we be confident that we really know something? And he's known, as I said, as a philosopher of skepticism. And so not only was he skeptical of a lot of religious beliefs, he was also skeptical of scientific claims. In particular, he went after the law of causality, the very foundation of science. Now, he loved science. He believed that we did have scientific knowledge. But one thing he liked to point out is that maybe we're too confident in what we think we know. So the skeptic can be useful sometimes in bringing our pride or our overconfidence down from lofty levels. So here we go. Here is Hume's argument against miracles. And I'm just going to present it as Hume would, summarized, of course, and then we'll evaluate it together. Okay, so here is Hume's argument against miracles. Let me explain. This isn't necessarily an argument against the possibility of miracles. So he wasn't arguing against the possibility of miracles. Instead, his conclusion, as you'll see, is that a wise person or a prudent person should never believe in miracles. Okay? So it's a little bit nuanced. He's not arguing against the possibility of miracles. He's arguing that a prudent or a wise person should never believe in miracles. Here's how he does it. Natural law, and in his vernacular, he's talking about the scientific laws of nature, if you will. Natural law is, by definition, a description of a regular occurrence, right? So take the law of gravity or whatever law of nature. It, by definition, is a description of what occurs regularly, right? I think we could agree to that. Premise 2, a miracle, by definition, is a rare occurrence. I think we can agree to that. In fact, I think I said that very sentence last week, right? A miracle has to be rare, or else it, just like the king's signet ring has to be rare, unique. If everybody had the king's signet ring, then it would defeat the purpose of being able to authenticate it really was from the king. So yes, by definition, a miracle has to be a rare occurrence. His third premise, the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare. Well, that seems intuitive, right? I mean, just think about all the evidence we have for the law of gravity compared to pick any miracle that you want to talk about, the evidence we have for that. Well, certainly we have a lot more evidence for the law of gravity than any particular miracle claim. Okay, premise 4. A wise person always bases his belief on the greater evidence. That makes sense, right? I mean, just a prudent, a good thinking person should base his belief on the greater evidence. If you have two claims, somebody says Bob committed the murder, somebody else says Sally committed the murder, right? You would want to evaluate their evidence and base your belief, your decision, on the greater amount of evidence. That seems right. So the conclusion, therefore, a wise person should never believe in miracles. So again, he's not arguing against the possibility of miracles. He's arguing that if you are a wise or a prudent or a good thinking person, you should never accept any miracle claims. You should never believe that miracles have ever happened. So I'm going to turn that over to you guys to evaluate for a few minutes here. What do you think of Hume's argument? Like it? Dislike it? Agree with it? Disagree with it? And defend your answer. As we've said many times, when you want to go after an argument, you can't just say you dislike it. You've got to find a way to go after it, or attack it, or defeat it. So what premise would you go after? Maybe the conclusion, the logic of the argument. How would you attack the argument if you do disagree with it? I'll leave up, you guys know what the question is to discuss. I want to leave up the argument, though, so you can all see it while you discuss it. Go ahead, I'll give you a few extra minutes for this. Well, I gave you some extra time to chew on this and talk about this because it's a fairly sophisticated argument. I think it's probably new to many of you, so I wanted to give you time to think it through and chat about it, think about it out loud, think through ways you would push back against it, talk with each other. And as we always say, these little mini conversations are just supposed to be the beginning. So afterwards, tomorrow for coffee, you guys continue these conversations. I think these are good, healthy conversations to have. So I overheard, some of what you guys are saying at the table, and I think I agree with some of the things that I was hearing. I think bottom line is it's too strong of an argument, or it proves too much. I mean, I think most of your intuitions or your red flags were correct. It seems to prove too much, right? I mean, if an argument puts you in a position where you shouldn't believe something happened that is possible to happen, I think that's a problem. If an argument puts you into a state where you refuse to believe something that could happen, but you're not ever supposed to believe it, even though it's a possibility, I think you're in troubled waters. I think that should be the initial red flag. It almost does too much. I mean, in that sense, you could use the exact same argument to make the case you should never believe in anything that's rare. For example, you should never believe that your friend got a hole-in-one, or that your friend got a perfect bridge hand, right? If you're going to follow this consistently, you would not merely disbelieve in any miracle claims, you would also disbelieve in any rare event. And I think that should be where red flags start going off, that there's something wrong. But where is the problem? Where does the argument go wrong? Where's the problem in the argument? Well, here's bottom line how most people push back against it. This is the most common objection to Hume's argument, and they claim, and I agree with it, right? The mistake he's making is that he's adding up evidence instead of weighing the evidence, okay? And here's the difference. The difference between adding up evidence and weighing evidence, okay? So if a murder was committed, and we think it was Bob, let's say, who committed the murder, if we were just adding up evidence, we could bring in thousands, millions, theoretically billions of people who didn't see the murder. That would be merely adding up evidence, right? But I don't think a prudent person would do it that way. A prudent, a wise person, would weigh the evidence of the two people who actually saw the event. Okay? Do you see the difference between adding up evidence and weighing up evidence? In other words, we shouldn't base our beliefs about something based on how rare it is. We should base our beliefs on things based on the quality of the evidence for them. Because there are some rare things that happen, obviously. In this context, we're making the case for miracles. But again, the argument, if it's successful, would cause you not to believe in any rare things. And there are very rare things that do happen. And if your position forces you to be in a place where you would never accept those things or never believe those things, then something went wrong. So I think the problem, if you go back to the argument, I think the problem is actually in premise 5, or the conclusion actually, the word never there. I think the word never is just too extreme. But remember, Hume's a skeptic. Hume is a philosopher of skepticism. And so he is probing us, he's pushing us on our knowledge of things, and there's a sense in which I appreciate that. But I just think his skepticism, at least here, goes too far. So here's where I think Hume can be very helpful. If you replace the word never there with the word skeptical, then I think it's appropriate. Therefore, a wise person should be skeptical about miracle claims. I think that's appropriate. In fact, I think it's correct. I think it's good to be skeptical of miracle claims. But here's the difference. It's one thing to be skeptical of a particular miracle claim. It's another thing to reject the mere possibility of it, or to reject that it happened without even looking at the evidence. Then I think you're taking skepticism too far. And there's a name for that. It's called being closed-minded. So we're encouraging people here to be open-minded to the evidence, at least. Well, we're going to wrap things up here in just a few minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A tonight. So if you have questions, write them down. Those of you that are anybody watching online, there'll be a time soon where you can ask some questions. So as we conclude this then tonight, if we're saying it's good to be skeptical, then when should we believe a genuine miracle has happened? If it's good to be skeptical, then at what point should we believe that a miracle has actually taken place? Because let's face it, some things are just weird. Some things are just strange, odd, peculiar, but that doesn't make them a miracle, right? And let's be honest, most miracle claims are either fake or a mistake, right? Most miracle claims are either people trying to fake you out, or they've made an honest mistake. I use this example a lot. If somebody came up to me on the street and claims that they have changed their bath water into Mountain Dew, right? Water into wine, you know where I'm going with this. If somebody came up to me on the street and claimed that they miraculously changed their bath water into Mountain Dew, as a skeptical, prudent person, I would think, okay, they're probably either faking it, i.e. the left pitcher, they're trying to lie to me and get me to do something, or they've made an honest mistake. Maybe they didn't realize that the bathtub that they were using had green lights in it. I don't know. But let's be honest, most miracle claims, I think we could agree, are either fakes or mistakes. So that does put us in a tricky situation. How do we know when a real miracle event has happened? Well, I think it's the same way for any rare occurrence. A hole in one. Something even more rare than that. A perfect bridge hand. Pick whatever rare event you want. How can we become convinced that that rare event really happened? Well, I think it's just a normal human condition. We ask questions. Did anybody see this hole? If my friend came up to me and said they got a hole in one, I said, okay, were you golfing by yourself? Did anybody else see this hole in one? Right? I mean, that's the sort of thing we do when we hear about very rare events. Are there any witnesses? Is there any evidence for this? Right? That's part of the human condition of being less than omniscient. We have to look for good reasons and evidence. I'll give you an example of this. So when I was a teenager, I had a good friend of mine, and he came to school one day much more excited than he normally was about coming to school. And you could just tell he had a story, right? And anybody who would give him an ear, he was telling his story. And he claimed that day at school that he had won a car, which I'm from a small town in Nebraska. That just doesn't happen, right? You win a car, right? You go on TV and win a car. But he said, no, this is through a magazine. I won a car that was in a movie. It was in, I don't know if you guys have ever seen RoboCop. that movie from the 80s. He said, I won the RoboCop car, the car that RoboCop drove around in the movie. The car that was actually in the movie, I won that car. And nobody believed him, right? Nobody believed him. I didn't believe him. None of my friends believed him. Because it's a rare event, right? And that's part of our human condition, is we are hesitant to believe these wild claims. But turn out, in fact, he did. It was through the magazine Nintendo Power. It was a magazine in the 80s and 90s about Nintendo games that we all read and had a subscription to. And he won the car that was in the movie RoboCop. So a few months later, he surprised us all by driving to school in it. And it was a Ford Taurus that had been decked out to be a futuristic-looking police car. Still had the cage that separated the front and the back seat like cop cars do and everything. So really, really neat, really fun. I rode around in it quite a bit. He wrecked it about a year later. So yeah, good story, bro. Changed my life. But unfortunately, yeah, he didn't have it for very long. But just, when we encounter rare things like that, what do? Evidence. Can I see the car? Do you have any paperwork? Asking for evidence. That's the point, right? That's how we find out if these rare things really happened or not. We look at the evidence. And that's what we'll be doing with Jesus' miracles. We're looking at the evidence. We're evaluating the evidence. And we're making the case this semester that the majority or the vast amount of evidence and the quality of the evidence is just so great for Jesus' miracles, greater than any other miracle claims in other belief systems out there. So here's where we're going with the argument, and I promised to give you guys this in a handout, and I brought that, so maybe some of you would help me pass that around. And here's something you can just have, so you don't have to take a picture of this or write all that. I know it's way too many words to put on one PowerPoint, but I really love to give people just the entire argument in a nutshell, so you can see where we've been, kind of see the flow of what we're doing, and to see where we're going in this. Number 4, after we get done, making our case for the possibility of miracles, we're going to admit, if you will, with question 4, that most of what we know about Jesus' claim to be God and Jesus' miracles comes from the New Testament. We're going to admit that. Not exclusively from the New Testament. We're going to see there's extra biblical sources as well that corroborate the New Testament. But mostly the evidence that we have for Jesus' claim to be God and his miracles comes from the New Testament documents, these ancient documents from the ancient world. So the question is, are these documents reliable? Why should we trust the New Testament? So we're going to evaluate the New Testament not as God's Word, not as the Bible, not as divine. I know Christians believe in that, and we're going to actually make an argument that the Bible is from God and divine next semester. That's going to be the theme of the whole semester in the spring, is evaluating the Bible. Is it God's Word or not? This semester, we're only looking at the New Testament like professional historians do. This feels odd sometimes to Christians, but it shouldn't. We should evaluate it at this level as well. Not merely at this level, we need to evaluate it as to whether it's God's Word or divine or not, but for the sake of this argument, all we're doing is evaluating it as historians do. Is it historically reliable? First of all, do we even have an accurate copy? We don't have the original anymore. So the copies that we use at our churches, are they accurate to the original? How do we know it hasn't been corrupted over the centuries? And then, do we have any good reasons to believe that these authors of the New Testament actually told the truth? Maybe we just have an accurate copy of a bunch of lies. So we need to settle on that question. That's the last thing we'll do in this argument, is make a case for why we should believe that these New Testament authors actually told the truth. And this is how historians evaluate all ancient documents. So it's not unique in that sense. We're going to be evaluating historically. So I always close with just a reminder about how to get involved with Ratio Christi. Tabling is a very fun way to have great conversations with Christians and non-Christians on campus. Or eventually we're going to be doing some evangelism on campus and going around and encouraging people to trust in Christ in a loving, respectful way. But for the time being, if you want to join us in tabling, this is a great way to have some of those conversations. And it's people who come up to you. You don't have to initiate the conversations. So join us Wednesday afternoons, 11 to 1. Sign up at the table if you haven't gotten signed up for our weekly email yet. Be inviting people to Ratio Christi. Fellow students, people from church, love to have them join us. Anybody, friends, coworkers, Christians, non-Christians. And then, of course, if you're interested if you are a UNL student, if you'd like to join as a member, talk to Joel. It'd be the easiest way to become an official member. And that helps us in many ways as an RSO on campus. If we have a good, solid list of membership, that's good. So if you're interested, if you're a student, if you're interested in what we're doing, join as an official member. No money involved. You can join for free. No commitment. But it's just good to have a good, solid membership list. All right, questions. What are you guys thinking? Questions that came up at your table? Anything that I can try to help with? Don't have all the answers, but I can try to help where I can. We do have folks ask questions via the mic, and that helps for our video recording. And it just helps everybody hear the question. Sam's got a question.
Can you clarify, last week we were talking, I think it was last week, we were talking about your definition of miracle, to maybe paraphrase and you can correct me, as a breaking the laws of science for proof of God.
Okay.
Do you think it's fair enough?
Close enough, yeah.
What then would you say to Pharaoh's magicians turning staffs into snakes?
Yeah,
Evidence of their Pharaoh being a god.
for sure. No, that's a good question. So there's a couple possibilities. I'll speak as a Christian, right? My understanding of what's going on there is that they weren't doing anything supernatural, that it was illusions, that it was trickery. So they weren't doing anything supernatural. It was just like when you go to an illusionist or a magician today. That's the sort of things that they were doing. And I think an indication of that is when Moses' miracles rise to such a level that they're unable to do or even attempt any sort of illusion to replicate it or compete with it. Or follow up.
So I was looking at the verse isn't that explicit in Exodus 7, whether or not it was a real
Supernatural thing. Mm-hmm.
But what about, you have to admit that supernatural things are possible through mnemonic means. And so, someone could, I think it's very fair to say that someone's doing miracles somewhere and say that they're a god.
Okay.
But they're not. Or evidence that they're God.
So, for example,
Saul.
Job, the book of Job, if the Bible is true, and I'm speaking as a Christian at this point, obviously you guys understand that. In Job, we see God allow Satan to inflict Job with things, right? So, and then, in fact, even beyond his disease, things happen to his family. He loses some of his, all of his children, and all sorts of things bad happen to Job. So we can ask ourselves, is that a supernatural thing because Satan caused it? I think there's a...
Explicit, those are storms and stuff that happen, and we have to know the backstory. So That
Okay.
is explicitly not God. That is explicitly not the godly way to go about it, at least.
Yep.
And yet a thing that is supernatural happened.
Well, I mean, even with the Job things, I think there's a sense in which we can call them supernatural because the ultimate cause of them was Satan. Now, whether he used providentially, you guys know what I mean by that, forces of nature to accomplish what God allowed him to accomplish or not. Or maybe you can even go to some of the things in Revelation, right? Of supposedly the Antichrist or Satan doing these miraculous signs. I think that's probably the best case for what you're talking about. Because I think there's even some verses that talk about how even the elect, Christians, if these things weren't stopped, even Christians, the elect, would be deceived by them because they were so compelling or so powerful. So I think as a Christian, you would have to think, well, why would God allow these things to take place that are such counterfeits? I still would push back as to whether those things that, depending on how you interpret Revelation, I know there's a lot of theological debate about that, but let's say if we interpret Revelation quite literally and think that these are actual events in the future where Satan is going to do X, Y, Z, it's still unclear to me whether he's really doing something supernatural or he's just tricking somebody, just like Pharaoh's magicians, in an illusionist sort of sense. I would still question that, if for no other reason that Scripture seems to make it very clear. I mean, I think we spent at least a week or two on this last year, going throughout Scripture to see all the times and the purposes of miracles, and time again how miracles were to authenticate a message. And so if they could easily be replicated, or that Satan could do them that easily, then to your point, it would defeat the purpose, or it would invalidate our epistemological source, our trustworthiness of being able to know if a real miracle took place or not. So I think maybe a more interesting theological question would be, why would God allow Satan to deceive people in that way? Whether he really does supernatural things, we wouldn't call them miracles, right? If we were using that definition of miracles. But let's say that Satan is able to do supernatural things. I have a lot of doubt about that, and I don't think he can, or that God would allow him to do supernatural things. But whether he's just tricking people, like magicians and illusionists and Pharaoh's magicians were, or if possibility, again, I don't accept this, but the possibility he is doing supernatural things, why would God allow him to do that? And it seems to be part of God's judgment. Part of God's judgment that he's allowing Satan, just like other examples where he's allowing Satan to do things as part of his judgment on mankind, those that have rejected him. So that's my take on Satan and satanic miracles. I don't think he can do supernatural things. I'm not convinced by that from Scripture. All right. Any other questions? Any online, folks? Go ahead, Joel.
So we had a bit of a discussion at this table about the Hume argument, and I think you mentioned a little bit that you said something like red flags should go off when we're saying, well, something is possible, but we should never believe it, or we should close off that possibility of belief in those things. And we were wondering, or I was wondering, is there a substantial way that's different from kind of Alvin Plantinga EAAN argument where he says, well, it can be possible that naturalism is true and Darwinian evolution happened, but it shouldn't be rationally held, or philosophically it doesn't make sense to hold that belief. Would there be any substantial difference between what Hume is saying and an argument kind of like, well, no rational person could, there's defeaters involved, so no rational person could hold it, or not? They were discussing kind of the argument jumps from starting with the definitions to then saying, well, a wise person would do or not do X. And I was thinking, well, sometimes, Planning will argue, well, a rational person should or should not believe X based on these defeaters. But I was curious if there's a substantial difference there.
The first thing that comes to mind, or the first thought I had was, Plantica is more pointing out a contradiction. So if you have, a contradiction in your belief system, then that's a good way to point out that it's not rational, right? That it's, if you have a contradiction that in your thinking, that's kind of a death nail to indicate that your thinking is wrong somewhere. But the more I think about it, and I'm running through Plantinga's argument in my head, or trying to on the spot, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't think he's necessarily trying to point out a contradiction there. I think his EAAN argument, evolutionary argument against naturalism, is pointing out how unlikely something would be. And if something is so unlikely to have happened, then it seems rational to dismiss it. So is his argument similar to Hume's? Is Hume saying the same thing? If it's so unlikely, and there is, and that's why I appreciate Hume's argument, because I think there is a ring of truth there. Just like when my friend claimed to have won a car, or somebody comes to me and claims something very extravagant. We're skeptical. It's our initial response to be skeptical, and that seems appropriate, right? When something unlikely is claimed, or an unlikely event is claimed to have happened, it seems appropriate for us to be skeptical or question it. It just seems to go too far to reject it outright. And so maybe that's all that Plantinga is doing. Maybe all Plantinga is doing is just saying, look, this is so unlikely to have happened that there's no, it would be irrational to think that it did.
And I guess the only thing that I can come up with myself is something like where he's talking about a specific conclusion that results from those two arguments that ends up defeating rational thought itself. We're not saying we shouldn't, a logical conclusion from those premises held in conjunction is that we shouldn't trust our thoughts, so that we just lost the game there. That's the only thing I can come up with.
Yeah.
This argument doesn't quite give us a reason to distrust our thoughts, it just tells us which thoughts. That's the only thing I can think of. I didn't know.
No, and maybe you're getting at that my first intuition was correct, that he is pointing out a contradiction. And the contradiction would be, we're trusting our own thoughts, and we shouldn't be trusting our own thoughts. That'd be the contradiction. But his second point, that we shouldn't trust our own thoughts because it's just very unlikely that if evolution is true, that our thinking process would be trustworthy. But again, I think whether it's Plantinga's situation or this situation, I think the right answer is, well, to look at the evidence. That's the difference. That's the difference. So, sorry, now you got me thinking out loud. Just like we do at the table discussions. This is good. That would be the difference. So I think both arguments would conclude that we should be skeptical about something that's very unlikely to happen, right? We should be skeptical if something is very rare is claimed to have happened. However, in most situations, we can just evaluate it. We can evaluate the evidence and see if it really did happen or not. Plantinga's pointing out in his situation that if his argument's true, we can't even evaluate the evidence for it because we've cut off the possibility of even trusting our cognitive faculties, which is what we would use to evaluate the evidence. Okay? So that's how it would be different. His argument would be much more damning. That's not the right word. His argument would be much more devastating a conclusion because we're not left with having the ability to trust in our cognitive faculties to even evaluate the evidence for a rare event. Whereas here, or in any other rare event, that's what we would have to do, is we'd have to evaluate the evidence for it, a hole in one, but we haven't cut our cognitive faculty ability to think through the evidence out from under us.
So, like I say, it fails in the philosophical merits, whereas Hume is a purely natural claim.
I think,
Or at least it's kind of maybe overgeneralizing, but at least kind of where the distinction is.
yeah.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar with Plantinga and his argument, I might have been very testing on your patience, but it's worthwhile exploring because we often use Plantinga's argument, and that comes up a lot. It's good. It's good to see those connections. Any others? All right. Well, continue the conversation at your table. A lot more food over there. And as we always say, you guys are free to hang out here, eat, discuss. So thank you for coming tonight.